I wanted to say, Joel, but I didn't have the heart to interrupt you when you were talking. Every time you talked, you put your face here. You did like this. Like that's
great.
gonna come out very sexy.
Yeah. It's my thinking hand.
Exactly.
All right. Oh, actually, I'm still recording. Oops. So this might make it to the final. Montage.
Yeah,
let's see.
Great.
perfect.
Yes.
There'll be some bloopers at the end.
Bloopers of this if you want.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody, to the 5th episode of Key Culture Podcast. I am Niilo Tarnanen, and I'm co-hosting the show with Matei Gheorghiu.
Hello, everybody.
And today we have two guests. We have violinist Anthony Marini. Hello, Anthony.
Hello.
And pianist Joel Papinoja.
Hi.
Hello, Joel. This is the second episode where we're gonna discuss the significance of classical music and how classical music has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic with freelance musicians. So today we have Anthony Marini and Joel Papinoja. If you want to know more of this podcast in general or more about Matei and me, please watch the introduction video, the episode number 1. Joel and Anthony, you're both freelance musicians, and maybe it would be a good thing to say something about who you are and how was your professional life before the pandemic started. Joel, could you tell us about that?
Well, as you said, I was working as a freelance musician. It was a combination of teaching, occasionally substituting in different cities, doing some choir stuff, students, gigs, just a variety. It was rather busy, also in the negative sense.
What do you mean by negative sense?
Like the balance between work life and the rest of the time wasn't quite there. But that's something I've only realized after the summer.
So it sounds that you had tough time having even maybe too many hours of work. So could you actually describe a bit more of your gigs you had at that time? Just because, as I've understood, pianists can have really many types of performances. I mean, they can have solo recitals, they can perform lead, they can be part of instrumental chamber music, they can play in orchestra, and so on. So could you describe some of your, what have you been doing lately or before the pandemic?
Yeah, all of that, what you mentioned. I've started having some orchestra stuff, and I played a lot of chamber music and a lot with singers too, and then some occasional solo gigs and some contemporary, some first performances, and just it's just a variety.
Cool. So you had a variety of different gigs. That sounds really nice. How for Anthony? How was your professional life before the pandemic?
Well, it was also very busy. Mostly performing, both in Finland and abroad. So I had quite an active performing career, especially in France, and playing with both Finnish and foreign ensembles abroad. I don't do much teaching. I have a couple of private students, and I have taught senior citizens chamber ensemble program. But I primarily specialize in early music, in Baroque music. So I perform a lot with the Baroque orchestras here in Finland. And that includes just about everything from chamber music or even just duo recitals to large-scale orchestra projects. And I also have worked for the past several years as the librarian of the Finnish Baroque Orchestra, which is a very part-time endeavor.
Okay, so also you had quite a diversity of different work opportunities. So then when the pandemic hit, how did that affect to you? What all changed because of that, both professionally and financially, but also personally? Maybe Anthony could continue.
Well, I mean, professionally, of course, everything completely stopped. So, I mean, almost all the gigs were canceled. There were very few that were still able to be organized in some way. But the majority of gigs in which the budgets depended on ticket sales, especially, these were all canceled without any pay. And the little teaching that I did have, the private teaching, all went online, which was of mixed success. Some students continued, some students dropped off. And the teaching of senior citizens obviously couldn't happen because everybody is a part of the risk groups. So everything pretty much completely stopped. Financially, it was pretty catastrophic. I mean, the pandemic hit just before Easter, which is the busiest time of year for me. It's when I probably make as much in the week surrounding Easter as I do for a third or half of the year. So it's was a really big blow financially. And personally was very tough, obviously. I mean, especially as it began to grow longer and longer and not having so much personal contact with people, that was very tough. But we've had our own sort of excitement at home because my wife had a baby over the summer, so we've certainly kept busy and haven't gotten complacent. But it's been a real life changer the past half year. So,
as a follow-up question to that, I mean, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but if you could estimate more or less in terms of money, how much have you lost since the pandemic started until, let's say, until things started getting more or less going?
I mean, I wouldn't say things are going yet. So, I mean, I'm still having concerts canceled, even December and November, lots of things canceled, things moved around. It's important to also remember that gigs that are postponed are essentially canceled gigs. I mean,
right.
So many people have tried to postpone things, and I will say that a majority of my work that was scheduled for this past summer has been pushed to next summer. But both legally and just practically, it's essentially a canceled gig because knowing that it's coming next year doesn't help me pay my rent this year. I wouldn't even want to venture a guess what the financial hardship has been, but I mean,
I'm asking that because a friend of mine who's a pianist, very active during the summer, she says that she's having teaching throughout the year, and during the summer she has like one gig every week or something like that, and that's like most of her freelance income. A year told me that she lost around 20,000 euros.
Yeah, no, I have no idea. It could be something like that. I mean, for me, I don't have any teaching. The little teaching that I did do with the seniors, of course, was stopped and canceled, and that's a very small venture, anyways. And the librarian work is a very small commitment per month. So So, I mean, essentially all income stopped for those months. So.
Yeah, so it has been really a catastrophic situation for you. You were saying that the pandemic hit the worst to those concerts that are dependent on the ticket sales. So how did that affect of the profile of your of the various like the variety of the work you do? Is there some types of performances that are totally cancelled, and then on the other hand some that are still going on, if we think of repertoire or style or things like this?
Well, basically anything. Most projects that are organized by choirs depend quite heavily on ticket sales for their budgets. So, for example, all of our passions were canceled. Also, this gig, the project in December that is already canceled for me is Messiah. Was supposed to be big Messiah project. So, I mean, it's quite. It sort of knocks out, and in general, all the larger scale things, especially when there were so many limitations on how many people could gather in the same space. So any large concerts or large venues were out of the question. But on the flip side of that, I do have to point out that there were some instances where things were able to be worked out. So for example, the Finnish Baroque Orchestra had a project that was supposed to be sort of early classical music with a star clarinet player presented in the House of Nobility in Helsinki. And of course, we couldn't have an audience. That was in, I think, April. So we couldn't have an audience and the soloist couldn't come. But we did still have an agreement with Yle, with the National Broadcasting Service, to broadcast the concert. So we were able to organize it that all the musicians who wanted to participate were able to perform chamber music and have that broadcast on Yle. So there have been some creative ways of finding replacement work for these situations, but of course the vast majority of things are just canceled. So
that sounds quite hard. Okay, how about Joel? How was your professional and personal life affected by the hit of the pandemic?
Most of my teaching is accompanying. It meant that like the spring was super empty because you can't really organize accompanying lessons through any kind of internet service. So I was just making a few tapes, and I had one piano student. That was like the only regular thing happening once a week. But apart from that, my calendar was completely empty from mid-March until end of July, which was quite a lot. Like we are talking about like the loss was in thousands.
How much?
Thousands, not a five-figure sum, but probably closer to that. But I feel like I was lucky because I was able to. I would have had to move in the end of spring anyway, so I didn't get an apartment. I put all my stuff in the storage, and I just stayed in mökki, in a cottage for the whole summer.
So you didn't have to pay rent.
Yeah, and it was actually really nice. I could borrow an electric piano.
Nice to hear that you also had an opportunity to turn this to a moment of recreation. How is it now in the early autumn? Have you regained some opportunities, or is it still very near to zero?
It seems that it's come back. it's also, of course, it's a mix at the moment. It's some new gigs, something that has moved from the spring, and some some singing exams that were supposed to happen in the spring are happening now. So it's actually quite a lot, but I try to keep some days off too now.
Yeah, because we touched this of how it's now, so I would ask both of you if you can somewhat make it into percentage points. Like, let's say, how much of the total amount of gigs you used to have last year have you lost? Let's say, well, I guess during the summer you lost everything, but let's say from August or September on, let's say until the recent future, December next year, I don't know, how much percentage of gigs you still have from what you had last year? Anthony.
It's actually good question. I'm going to look at that right now. I'm just looking briefly at my work list, and I think that I would say now. I mean, before, of course, everything was canceled. Let's say 95% of everything was canceled, but now maybe it's close to 1/3 is only canceled. So with the way that things are now, of course, if
it can get worse anytime.
Yeah, if it would get worse, and if there would be more restrictions, then for sure it would plummet like a rock in the ocean. So,
how about Joel?
Yeah, it sounds. I would say the third too.
1/3 of the normal is actually quite harsh situation if it also means that you will get only 1/3 of the income you would normally have. Does this represent of the financial situation approximately, or is this too hasty deduction?
I would say for me at least, Anthony, that it's probably relatively accurate for. I mean, as I'm sure it's the same with all freelancers, gigs can pay wildly different amounts. So just because 1/3 of the gigs canceled doesn't mean that it's sort of evenly spread out across all of the compensation categories. But like, for example, I would say of the gigs that are canceled, only a couple of them are ones where I had myself a very significant role. So, yeah, I mean, going forward now. So in that sense, yeah, it's probably about 1/3 less of the income. But of course, it can vary wildly depending on what it is that gets canceled. So,
how about for Joel?
Yeah, it's the same basically. I think it's about a third of the money. So.
Okay, Matei, you have a follow-up.
Well, I was gonna go to the next question. That what is the? Well, I mean, I guess you pretty much said that the future is very unstable, but so can I ask you, like, how much time theoretically do you have the gigs fixed for? Like, how long do you have them fixed for? Like the next 2 months or 3 or 1 year, or and realistically, let's say there is no lockdown happening anymore. What are your hopes within the next 1 year, let's say, of the field or of your work? Let's start with Joel.
I have fixed gigs until the end of this year, but that might of course change fast. There's some work for next year too.
How about the teaching?
Yeah, it still continues.
All right, so that you have for longer.
Yeah, at the moment it looks quite positive, but it's definitely it's much more uncertain than it used to be.
Right, and
depends on
because
the
you're
situation.
and because you're working with like paid, you're a tuntiopettaja, right? Or so
Yeah.
in English that would be an hourly paid teacher. So that means
Yeah.
that if there's no need for you as an accompanist wherever you're teaching, they can just let you go without any compensation, right?
Probably, yeah.
All right, so you don't know.
Yeah, I need to check that.
Okay. All right. How about Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really subscribe to this idea that the lockdown is going to end in the next year. So, so I think that the whole premise is faulty.
I was being positive.
Yeah, no, I'm being realistic. I think that there is no. I think that this attempt to wait until the worst is over and then we can get back to our normal lives is a dangerous way of thinking, and I think that it. Of course, if that happens, it's great, but I think that people should be much more focused on how to adapt to the new situation and the new normal going forward. So, I mean, for me, just like Joel, I have until the end of the year is pretty booked as normal. Canceled as whatever is canceled thanks to COVID. But usually I'm booked out almost a year in advance, and of course, nobody right now is booking very much in 2021, just to be cautious and to see how budgets end up and things like that. So it's definitely very cautious right now. And the same thing with the little teaching that I have. It sort of goes on a periodic basis that every few months we reassess what the situation is and if we can continue doing it. So,
Matei.
Sorry, Niilo, I'm pretty much stealing the question you were probably going to ask next. But since this is something that
That's okay.
but this is something that since I probably saw, maybe I should ask Anthony, because I remember you wrote on Facebook at some point that you're considering changing to IT. You have a degree also in IT, if I'm not mistaken, and you are considering at some point like this is not working with music. Everything is canceling all the time. I don't know what I should do, and I think the conclusion was that you are going to still stick to music. Can you develop that a bit?
Yeah, I'll make one small correction. I don't actually have a degree in computer science. I studied computer science and went through the majority of the studies, but in the US, as is the case in most universities there, it's extremely expensive every year that you're there, and it would have required me to stay a fifth year to study, and I just didn't have the money for it. So, but I have worked, before I came to Finland, I worked for several years in IT, so I do have that background. And I have to say that was born out of this uncertainty which was caused by the pandemic. So it's one of the things which I love the most about being a freelancer, being able to do whatever, all sorts of interesting things that I want, and I'm never going to the same place twice and almost never playing with the same people twice. So it's always changing and constantly interesting. But of course, in a situation like this, all that uncertainty comes crashing down around you, especially when you have a family to provide for and a new baby. So I mean, my old lifestyle is, of course, very tempting. I would say at this point, I in no way want to leave music. I mean, I can't imagine doing that, and that was a big reason why I moved to Finland in the first place, was to find a better music computer balance, which has been very music heavy in the past 10 years. But I'm definitely very curious to see if I can find some sort of opportunity that would have a small amount of stability and also something interesting. I mean, I enjoy the computer science work very much, and it's very interesting to me. So it would be a nice complement in the same way that some people teach in a music school or some people even have other day jobs doing other things. So it would give me something to have a little bit of a change of pace for music, and also some sort of consistency financially and otherwise. But that is as of right now still a pipe dream. So we have to see how that develops.
So so this is more like not as a B plan, but rather as a maybe it would be nice to combine A and B plan together.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest pet peeves, is this concept that musicians need a B plan. And when I was applying for schools and for my undergraduate and trying to find places that had both good music and computer science programs, and it was very commonly insinuated that I was interested in computer science just in case music didn't work out. But for me, they're both very interesting. They're both art in a way, and they're both parts of my life that and things that I'm very passionate about and very interested in. So it would be nice not necessarily to combine them, but to find suitable places for them in my life. So to find some sort of a balance. Before, the balance that I had was just a full-time job as a computer programmer and a freelance musician, but that in the end wasn't very fulfilling. So now I'll try to find a slightly different balance.
Yeah, I can somewhat relate to that because I mean I'm teaching music in music school, and I really love my job in this school here in Kankampa is wonderful, and the kids are great and the colleagues are great. And I did teach in other places before that. But there is this feeling sometimes that, you know, if you do have a lot of hours every week with something else, you're not going to have time to do your freelance work. You're not going to have time to do your gigs. You're not going to. So in an ideal world, I guess musicians shouldn't think like this, that I should find a job so that I can also have some stability, and then I do on the side. Some people do puzzles with their kids on Sunday, but we're dreaming of doing the other work on Sunday, let's say. And that's something that we kind of take as a given, that's how it is. Yeah. On the other hand, I am working as a music teacher on music. I'm not teaching geography, so it's still like part of the same field.
Yeah, I think this differs to every person in the field of music, and also I think there might be a difference between composers who are rarely paid, or if they are paid, they are underpaid, even compared to the performing musicians.
Yeah, guys, stop complaining.
And then performing musicians, or is it so? I don't know. It would be really interesting to hear Joel's point of view to this questions about having various jobs side by side, and if some of them is A plan and some of them is B plan, and how does it pay for? Do you have something to comment on this?
Well, I'm also familiar with the idea where you think, oh, I should have a day job, then I can then there's one possibility to do music, but unfortunately time is limited, so of course it doesn't work. But even psychologically, I would say it's a good idea to have a plan B, or at least, if not a concrete plan, just some, just to remind yourself that you're not locked in the situation of you just have to do music. But this, I think it gives some air to the process. I would say you don't have to be a musician. You can still enjoy music, but to tie it in too strongly into the identity, to have some freedom of movement if the situation grows into where it's really not viable to do just music. Does that make any sense?
I guess so, yeah.
I think it does. I think it does.
Mm.
At least for me, it has been really, really nice to have a part-time teacher job too. So that, for example, now I'm teaching 3 days a week, and then I have 2 days for composing in a good situation. So at least to me, it provides some balance between the artistic freedom and then on the other hand, the opportunity to have some, some expectable amount of money every month, or actually if not every month, but during the semesters. Yeah, okay. I'd like to ask Anthony about the situation in United States. Is it different from the situation if considering the freelance musicians and the effect of the pandemic? As we all know, the pandemic has really been much harder there. So you might expect that it has been also harder time for the freelance musicians. Do you know anything of that via your friends or something?
I do, of course. I still keep in contact with the people there, so I'm aware of what's going on, although not too much about the details. And of course, it's very, very regional specific. So some places have been hit very, very hard, and some places, especially places maybe that have either been taking it more seriously early on, or that are less sparsely populated, they haven't had quite as tough of a time. But in general, most arts organizations are taking this extremely seriously. I think the vast majority of things are simply canceled. I don't think that there is quite the effort to find some sort of replacement projects as there has been, at least in my experience here in Finland. Also, in terms of assistance for artists, I think that in general, there's much less in the US than there is in countries like Finland. But for example, the slew of grants that came up for freelance artists in the spring, this was something that definitely did not exist in Finland. Did not exist in the United States.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been very tough. I know many people, many musicians who have just had nothing since March, absolutely nothing. And to be totally honest, I have no clue how they're making it work. But yeah, it's really hard. It's tough because I think also in the United States, well, depending on what kind of work you do, but travel is a very important part of being a freelance musician, and that's of course complicated when there are all these restrictions in place, and certain states are hotspots and others are not. So, but people are taking it very seriously, and I think they're definitely having a tough time of it. So.
Yeah, I wanted to ask. I think you're from New York, right? From New York State.
Yes.
So I mean, I guess New York is full of like concerts and has a very rich, let's say, cultural life. But it's also a very packed city. So is everything there canceled, or that's more the case for smaller areas?
I mean, New York State is very large. New York State is 19.5 million people, about.
Yeah.
New York City is a little bit less than 8.5 million people. Still a lot, more than all of Finland. But I come from a very different part of the state, really the opposite side of the state, same distance between my city and New York City as there is between Helsinki and Oulu. So, I'm not really tapped into New York City very well. Of course, they have been hit very, very, very hard, and there have been a lot of deaths. there, mostly because it's such a packed city. And I mean, lots of things have been canceled though. Met just canceled their whole upcoming 2021 season. So I mean, and that's not only them. I mean, many groups have been doing this, and musicians who thought that they had work security have been really hung out to dry. The only good thing is, I mean, one of the biggest differences between the United States and Finland when it comes to pandemics like this is that in the United States, many people depend on their workplace for their health insurance. So losing your job might mean losing your health insurance, or at least making it more complicated to get your health insurance.
And now we get into political territory. So
I'm not going there. I'm not going there. But it's just it's a really big difference.
Absolutely,
I mean,
absolutely.
Like I have had no very little work for half a year, and yet I don't at all worry. Like if I get sick, I for sure can go to the doctor, or we can give birth in the middle of the pandemic and not worry. First of all, about getting infected at the hospital, and second of all, don't have to worry about going bankrupt for it. So, I mean, that's a huge thing also emotionally and mentally, the way that you deal with, I mean, I think that's another whole aspect of the pandemic, that's very rarely talked about. But as stressful and as isolating as it has been here, it's a whole nother story when then you also have to worry about the physical well-being of you and your family. So
yeah, I guess like in Finland, at least, I've always gotten this feeling that if it gets really bad, I can still apply for some Kela, or I can apply for a Corona grant, or I don't know. I won't get like completely. I'm not gonna go become homeless.
you can try.
but I was wondering about this, like, yeah, if my healthcare is tied to my salary, and all the employers know this, and they know that they have to like give more for me when they hire me, everyone's going to be more picky when they hire. So, and
I mean, yeah, that's a different aspect. I'm not going to go there too much, but yeah, the approach to that is a bit different there than it is here. So I mean, it's
okay.
Health insurance is a built-in benefit that most people get as part of a full-time job. There is nowadays also in existing this kind of exchange where people can buy from the exchange rather than getting it through their workplace. So health insurance is available, but I know that many people have been having troubles with getting kicked off their current health insurance. And the way the private insurance works, it also dictates which doctors you can go to and how often. So it can create really big upsets for people who especially have quite serious medical needs. So, but I don't want to get too much into that. That gets a bit off subject. So,
I'd like to ask from Joel because if I remember right, you are originally from Kouvola, and but have you recently been mostly working in Helsinki, or have you traveled a lot for work?
I traveled during the last year. I traveled mostly to Kokkola and Kouvola, but this is temporary. I wouldn't say the pandemic has had an effect.
All right, then maybe we can go on to, let's say, a second part of the discussion, which is more about classical music in general. So I'm just going to ask you straight away, why is classical music important to you, and why do you think we need it? Let's start with Joel.
Yes, it is, and we do need it. I was thinking about the when they started playing older music instead of just contemporary music in 1830s, thinking like, oh, there's actually good music written that's worth playing, and I don't think that has changed. There's still find it pretty exciting. So it's and it doesn't in some sense it's just the fact that we have like blueprints or the scores. The music doesn't exist if it's not performed. So just to have this opportunity to listen, perform this,
All right.
these artworks.
How about Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I think it's very important, and I think that it's more than just entertainment. It's more than just elevator music. It's also a way that it's a communal thing very often, especially public concerts. You know, getting to see other people, having the interaction, not only seeing other people in the audience, but having the interaction between the performer and the audience. And it's also a way to, for many people, to sort of unpack feelings and emotions and everything like this, and experience something that you maybe wouldn't normally otherwise experience. And I think that situations like this have been instrumental in remembering that, because especially as like I've started to have a couple of public concerts with an audience, even though the audience is all wearing masks, and even though the audience is spaced apart, and ushers are making sure that people come in and leave at the correct times, but still that's palpable how much how hungry people are for classical music concerts, and how much they've missed them, and yeah, it's I think it gives not only the awesome chance to perform music new and old that's has your own mark on it, but at the same time it's a very important social part of our society, and a very important way for us to interact with each other.
Both of you raised the question of kind of new and old repertoire a bit in a different words and in different way. How do you see the the relationship between classical music and contemporary music? Are they part of the same continuum? Are they two completely different things, or is the situation much more complex than that? I'd first like to ask it from Anthony.
I think absolutely they're part of a continuum. I mean, everything has been new music at some point, and then becomes old music. So I mean, it's all part of a moving timeline, and also very often music is in reaction to something else. So musical styles develop, and they become they're always developing in relation to something, either events around them or music that comes before them or the circumstances in which they're created. So absolutely, I would consider them intertwined. And as someone who specializes in early music, I actually play a refreshing amount of modern music as well, and have made even several discs that feature new music on period instruments. So I think it's a very important part of any musician's life, whether you're specializing in historical performance or not. And I think also sort of the approach that many of us take in the early music world can be very interesting for new music, contemporary music that's written, even especially for our instruments. Because we have, in a way, we feel very comfortable with this idea of doing more than what's on the page, that we're not just going to wait and do all of the instructions exactly as requested and then leave it there, that we'll always look for more, as we do with much of early music, where very little is actually written, and it really requires this kind of creativity and putting your own stamp on things.
Yeah, interesting. I need to say that I'm not only a contemporary composer, but I also an aficionado of early music. So it's nice to hear. hear these kind of words. Okay, how for Joel? What's your opinion on?
Yeah, it's definitely a continuum. I prefer to look at the Western music as one thing. That's just it's sometimes a bit senseless to just start splitting it up, especially if you start talking about classical and pop music, like the whole range of contemporary music. It's still the same building blocks. There's a tonality which I believe doesn't really exist in other musical cultures as such.
So you're saying that tonality is connecting pop music and classical music and contemporary music and other types of music, or did I understand right?
Yep, there's more in common than we usually think.
Yeah, that's an interesting claim, because on the other hand, there are many things that have maybe been, let's say, cut out in some point of history, but at least in my opinion, it's important to also see the connections between different times in the history. What do you think are the struggles that classical music faces, whether there are COVID or no COVID, and how could they be overcome? Joel, do you see any these kind of struggles in classical music?
Struggles. People, I think it's a very common topic to say that it's that art form is dying or everything, but I think it's doing very well. It's just if we shouldn't just forget its value and believe in it.
How about Anthony? See these kind of struggles or some things that are some issues that are raised inside of our field?
Well, I agree with you all that this sort of premise that classical music is dying is a very old one, and one that's been going on for a long time. So, I mean, it's also a very regional issue. I would say that the state of classical music in a place like Finland, or even in most European countries, is very than what it is, for example, in the United States or in South America or somewhere like this. So I would say that it's we have quite a luxurious situation here. I mean, if you think about Finland specifically and the amount of financial support that comes from the public sector, as well as just how many orchestras exist in a country of 5.5 million people. I mean, it's mind-blowing. So in that sense, not all is lost, and I don't think that everybody has to be constantly preaching doomsday. But at the same time, of course, there's plenty of issues, and I think one of your later questions is going to address the financial side of it, so I'm not going to go into that now. But I think that's maybe the thing that's most important is keeping it fresh and keeping it interesting, so that it's not just performing it so that you perform it and you get your salary and then you go home and that's it, but that it's a sort of evangelism, to use a word with slightly too many religious connotations, but evangelism in the sense that you have to be sharing your passion with other people and trying to get them to be passionate with you. And I think that's an important part of what we do in all parts of the music field, not only as performers, but as composers or as teachers or what have you. So
I think what you say about being passionate is totally right, and I must say that I don't believe in this kind of doomsday prophecies myself. I actually see that we're alive and kicking, but on the other hand, are we going to be the same as we were 50 years ago, or same as we were 100 years ago? Probably not. And I think this is what makes this question interesting.
Whatever the struggles might be or not, I expressed some of my beliefs on that in previous episodes, so maybe I'm not going to repeat myself. But I would like to ask you guys, Joel or Anthony, if you could be in a position of power now, let's say with this COVID crisis, or otherwise, what would be the things you would change in if you were an orchestra manager, a festival director, or a politician? What would be the things you would change that would affect, like, would have a good impact on the field? Let's start with Anthony.
Well, I can say, relating to this pandemic, I have a very concise answer, and that is to point money towards the performers, towards the end users, the musicians, the performers, and not so much towards organizations. Because at least in Finland right now, a lot of course, in the spring there were many individual grants that people could apply for. Those have now finished and dried up, and those of us who received them are for sure very grateful for them, but they don't get you very far, very long.
Yeah, and I said that in the previous episode also, like, for people who didn't watch that there in Finland there have been at least two or three grants directed to freelance musicians who have had losses, financial losses, and they've gave out grants that were somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000, I think, some kind of sums like that. So with that kind of money, you can live 1 or 2 months, but you cannot live a whole year. So
yeah, there's definitely more than 2 or 3. There were, I think, 6 in the spring, at least. But still, I mean, I think it's very rare that anyone got more than one of those. I think they were pretty cautious in making sure that they were spreading around, which is in a way, of course, very good. But now the majority of the help that's going is going towards organizations, which makes it very difficult for musicians or the sort of little people, so to speak, to plan their life going forward. But if we're talking in a more generic sense, not relating to the pandemic, then I would, instead of rather just putting more money into orchestras or whatever, because that's of course always a good idea. No one's going to ever say no to that. But I think it would be more interesting to see more sustainable ways of getting people involved in the arts. So not that I don't want people to become overly reliant on ticket sales, but at the same time, I think that there's many different ways that the arts can be consumed besides live performances with tickets, and I think it would be really interesting to have more stress on that.
Like what?
Well, I mean, now in the pandemic time, we've seen much more in the way of recorded performances. Of course, they've been by and large free, which is, I think, a mistake. Because again, if we go into the premise that this is not going to be over anytime soon, then that's not a sustainable strategy to give free concerts online all the time. But that's one example. There's, of course, recordings historically we've used, but there's lots of different ways, also in educational space, in health space with music therapy. There's lots and lots of different ways that music can be integrated in people's lives so that it's not just a matter of putting people into concert halls, because at some point you start to have conflicts. And at some point you're going to, especially in a country as small as Finland, you're going to hit critical mass where you can't have more people in concert halls, and then you're going to start having people competing for the same audience, and that doesn't go anywhere. So
I think there's a lot of sense in what you're saying, and I think what you say makes me wonder even more if it's a wise strategy that, as it is now in Finland, that most of the money is that the government gives, or most of the money that the private funds grant actually they kind of keep the system as it is, and quite a little bit of all the money that is in the system is actually directed to finding what would be a good, new, sustainable future, and not only, keeping things as they already exist. That was thing I wanted to say. How about for Joel? Do you want to comment on this issue about
Yeah,
finances?
I agree with many of the points. Something I just have to add is I've been following the situation in Kouvola quite closely. When we talk about organizations like orchestras, they also develop what they do. For example, in the case of Kymi Symphony, they do a lot of concerts in nursing homes and schools. It's not only concert hall stuff, but like in connection with this, I think it would be good for the cities to remember that the amount of money they put into culture it's peanuts in the whole budget, and it makes a big difference. It's a lot of money for the orchestras and for culture organizations, but it's actually it's just a fraction.
Yeah, so I wanted to very briefly say a point connected to that. Last time I said that I don't understand why schools don't, for example, take their kids more to the concert hall, or why it's not encouraged in general to do it as much as it could be done. Because if you think about it, I never really understood this from the state's point of view. Like, if you are going to pay for orchestras and operas, for theaters, and you're not investing in your own citizens' taste for those things for which you pay anyway. I think since we have these institutions, we could for example, just somehow create a sustainable system in which you have these institutions which are supposed to do music or theater, or they are museums, and then you create a public that is enough interested in these things so that it keeps going to those. So you don't have to pay dying institutions, or you wouldn't have to create other new institutions that provide something else, because there's a new need for something else now. Yeah.
Anthony.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of add a little bit that I understand what Matei is saying, and I think that there has been recently more attempts to help with that. What comes to mind first is the Finnish Cultural Foundation's Taide Testa program, which was exactly this. But it was a huge program, which was very, very expensive, I imagine. And it had to do with giving school-age children the chance to experience art in a way that they normally would never have otherwise been able to do. So absolutely, I agree with Matei's point about needing to integrate this more into the educational system. I think also it's important to remember that different kinds of funding should have different purposes. So public funding of the arts, I think it's good that it goes towards these sort of stable orchestras, city orchestras, and radio and the opera orchestras and this kind of stuff. I think that's really good. And of course, as you all said, the amount of money, when they talk about cutting music money from budgets, it's just symbolic, because they're just doing it because music is the most visible thing. So you can cut a very little bit and make it look like you're cutting a huge amount of money. But actually what they're not acknowledging is how musicians and how artists in general are able to take infinitesimally small amounts of money and make something incredibly refined out of it. So that's one thing. But I think there are other forms. Of course, in Finland, there's also a very well developed private funding sort of system with foundations, private foundations. And I think that should focus as much as it can on fostering new things, and rather than propping up the same old things. And I think that's what, at least in the early music world, and maybe the music sort of freelance world in general, I think that it's really healthy to have a constant turnover of ensembles, and of course great also to have the stalwarts that have been playing together for hundreds of years or whatever, but at the same time really nice to have lots of fresh new ensembles that are constantly reinventing the musical landscape. And the final one, which is of course not really very well developed in Finland at all, is sponsorship, which is something that I think eventually, as politicians get more and more trigger happy with cutting music out of the budgets, that will become a more necessary part of funding in Finland. But that's something that in the United States, for example, is much more developed. Since we don't have very much public funding for the arts, then private sponsorship is a big thing there. So
thanks, Anthony. I think you provided a really valuable analysis of how different forms of funding and financing actually have a bit different functions in the whole system.
Yeah, like I'm talking more as I don't know exactly how it's in Finland, to be honest, although my experience is mostly here. But this is more of a sense I'm getting from, in general, other countries, that, let's say, classical music is not considered so hip anymore to teach in like the music class in schools. So kids in the music class do a lot of games, and they sing ABBA and like some, I don't know, Beatles, and play with drums or with recorders and so on. And they might learn a bit about Mozart, but that's just how it is. And I'm just thinking that if you have these institutions that provide music, it's unsustainable not to teach future generations or like give them any kind of interest in this kind of music, so that later you can have like all sorts of starving musicians complaining that nobody wants to hire them or wants to finance their projects, and so on. So I'm talking more, let's say, in a general term. I guess this happens also in Finland. At least I've talked with some people who studied music education who has told me that there used to be a bigger shift on classical music coming from the music teachers than there is now. But I can't say I know very well, and I have not lived here until I was 23. So,
well, as somebody who has lived here from birth, I can say that change happened much before my childhood. Okay, but I think we have quite close to the time we need to end. So is there anything that any one of us would like to add before we start to end? No? Okay. In that case, thank you very much, Joel. Thank you very much, Anthony, for joining us today. And well, this was not the last, but one of the first episodes. There is more to come. So stay tuned in Key Culture podcast. My name is Niilo Tarnanen, and I say you farewell. Have a nice day.
have a nice day, everybody.